Hey guys, Apav here, and once again, my church is closed due to what's being reported as coronavirus. We don't really know because the tests nowadays are so inaccurate, but for whatever reason, more people are getting sick right now, so the church that I've been attending has closed for Sunday, and I thought I'd make another video. I made a video like this back in 2020, but I hadn't really planned anything, and I haven't watched it back in a while, so I don't know what all I got into. I just thought I'd put a video up because maybe a few people are also having the same problem, but also I haven't really talked about my faith too much on this channel in recent months, so I thought I'd go ahead and make this video. I've been working on uploading Call of Duty content more often. It seems like most of my subscribers like that stuff, so I'm going to keep making that kind of stuff along with some of my other random things that I like to do. But if you haven't been subscribed to me or know me personally for too long, you might not know that I'm a Christian. That's partly why I don't curse in my videos. Obviously, religion is a lot more than just a set of rules. We might do certain things out of personal conviction, but it isn't exactly just a checklist you follow to get into heaven, at least from the Christian faith. But in the past, I'd say year, I've been focusing a lot on textual criticism, which is kind of the debates Christians get into when picking different translations of the Bible or how to translate the Bible and all that stuff. I thought I'd talk a bit about this because of all the research I've been doing. It has nothing really to do about salvation or Jesus, but it's an important thing that I think has strengthened my faith overall. It's very interesting because I went into it after meeting a homeless guy in St. Augustine who was just screaming the praises of the King James Version. And I thought, I've met people throughout my life who told me the King James Version is the only version of the Bible you can trust. And I wanted to know why. Where is that coming from? I think for the most part, it comes from people preferring the received text as a source text, which is the complete New Testament in Greek. It was, I don't know the right word, formatted, but compiled during the Protestant Reformation, and that's what all those early translations used. So if you prefer the received text, you're kind of stuck with the King James Version, as I went for months on a search for a modern translation of the received text. I could not find it. New King James uses the majority text, not the received text. Almost every other version just uses a conglomeration of a different other source texts. So that's what kind of got me interested in this. Not so much as whether or not the Bible is corrupted. However, there are some people who believe if you're not using this specific source text, then you're reading corrupted text. I have kind of distanced myself from that debate, even though I do think there's probably one source text that's more accurate than all the others. I just don't get involved in that debate because I honestly don't know. I have narrowed it down some, but I'm not going to make a definitive answer in my mid-20s on a topic that people in their 80s have debated for centuries. Sorry if you see a little camera change, I had to clear up some storage. Anywho, well, while studying source text, I came to a realization after a while that they are insanely similar. Like, these texts span the course of 2,000 years, and it is insane that we can look at manuscripts from before the 4th century and they're lining up with what we're reading today. Like, that's just incredible. We can look and critique so much and miss the overall picture and the miracle that we have the Word of God today. We know it is because it hasn't changed. I used to get into tons of debates when I was in middle school and high school with non-Christians whether or not the Bible is corrupted, or how do you know that not just one man wrote this to make a bestseller. I got that argument once. But we can pinpoint so much, and the verses that are usually debated are so few in the span of the hundreds of thousands, but you can pick up on what they mean through the context of all the other verses around them. So even going into this, I find it more proof than something that would promote skepticism. Not that skepticism is a bad thing. In most cases, it's a good thing. But when we're talking about personal relationship with God, if you know you have that relationship, it's no longer just like, oh, I believe this to be true. It's like, I know it to be true. And I think being skeptical of that is less about being skeptical and more about either not trusting yourself or not trusting God. But that's a deeper topic for another day, I guess. Anyways, after learning a bit about these source texts, I thought, well, is there any modern translation that I could get a King James Version elitist to read? And I looked through them all. I basically was comparing 12 different verses that kind of differ in the English translations. It isn't even that they differ in the source texts. That's what I found weird, is that there's also the problem of translation method. Back during the Protestant Reformation and pretty much any time before the 1800s, all translations were literal. They translated a Greek word or a Hebrew word or a Latin word or an Aramaic word directly into the next language. Now we have thought-for-thought translations, which are attempting to take a thought and translate that into a thought in a new language. This leads to a lot of bias when they're not intending to a lot of time. And when I started looking at more literal translations, I was shocked at some of the context I was missing out on by reading other translations. And again, it was just like a handful, like a dozen verses. But when you want to study the Word of God in depth, you want to know that what you're reading is not the opinions of some other dude. So, out of all the new translations, I found that the Holman or HCSB Bible was fairly literal. It was actually more literal than the CSB Bible, which just stands for Christian Standard Bible. I don't know why one is more literal than the other, but the HCSB seemed to be all right. The best of the modern I could come up with was still New King James. The New King James, instead of using the received texts, uses the majority text, which is what the Orthodox Church also prefers. It's basically, they took a ton of manuscripts and found that the vast majority of them, like 95 or 99.5, something like that, all agreed 100% with each other, or 99% of the time with each other, and they took that majority and made it one agreed upon text, and that's the majority text, and that's what they used for the New Testament in the New King James. I think that is a decent method. The reason anyone even debates it is because there's some debate whether they actually were looking at the majority of manuscripts, but also if we are to believe God preserves his word, then there must be a lineage we can follow from the time it was written to now that has been uncorrupted. And that's why some people prefer the King James Version, because they believe the received text has been preserved throughout time, which the majority text also claims to come from. There's also the Alexandrian line that is coming from translations that came out of Alexandria, Egypt. That includes a Greek Old Testament, which was a Greek translation of the original Hebrew, as well as a line of the New Testament. Now, because the Bible often doesn't talk very well about Alexandria, a lot of people immediately shut those off as corrupted, and I'm not going to get into that debate too much right now, but that's where the King James people are coming from. And it's not just the King James Bible. That's one thing that I wanted to point out, is these people that I've met all my life who say, only read the King James Version, which, like, I think it's a solid translation, they seem to ignore the other translations from the time that I actually prefer. The Geneva Bible, for example, came out around the same time, uses all the same source text, has all the same verse numbers. I actually, from comparing these two translations, I prefer the Geneva Bible, and it's not just because I'm trying to be a black sheep or something. It's just very tiny things, like how the King James Version, with any reference to death, they basically just translate it to hell, which in the context of some verses doesn't make any sense. Like in the Geneva Bible, it might translate to the grave, which makes more sense in certain circumstances. Either way, those problems are non-existent in modern translations. Most modern translations will not even contain the word hell. They'll just put in the literal Greek and Hebrew words that were there. I also think that can mislead certain people, but luckily nowadays we have the internet and we can just go on a Bible Hub and compare every version. So if you ever question something, just go on Bible Hub and you can see all the comparisons. There's also so many tools now where you can just see every word in the original Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, whatever, and click on that word, see the foreign word, see a definition of that foreign word, and it makes so much more sense. Anyways, after all that research, I found the New King James is the best modern translation if you're hunting a certain word and you don't want to get any look for anything that's too complicated to get into. However, I just kept digging because, I don't know, I'm obsessive or something. So I ended up finding what is called the KJ3. It's Green's literal translation. It's a literal translation of the same source texts as the King James Version, but it was done very recently. I believe it was completed in 2006 or 2008. Because of that, it's in fairly modern English, so we can understand it. The only problem is Green sadly passed away in 2008 or right around there. So there's not very many available versions of it. There's a hardcover and a soft cover and some digital stuff floating around the internet. This is how thick the soft cover is, and this is the only version you can really get unless you spend a ton of money on a memorial leather-bound version. So this isn't really something you would want to carry around a ton, unlike some of the thin line New King James Version stuff, but I find this extremely useful, and I found it extremely useful when I started working on my own version, or I guess compilation. So during all this research, I started figuring out that every literal translation of the Aramaic Bible was insanely accurate. It was agreeing with every little criticism I was looking at. However, the only complete translation of what is known as the Peshitta, the Aramaic Bible, was really expensive. This is $70, and it's just like a textbook. But it's really nice, translation-wise. I really like it. But I wanted something that would be more available to the public, but also utilize that Aramaic New Testament, and thought, why not throw in the Hebrew Old Testament? You throw in a Hebrew Bible instead of the Hebrew Bible according to the Aramaic. So with that, I found a public domain translation of the Tanakh and a public domain translation of the New Testament Peshitta, and created the Masoretic Syriac version. And I revised a couple verses and released it back into the public domain, so it's still in public domain. You can copy it anytime you want. Digital versions will be linked in the description, whatever. I ended up rebinding mine with a faux leather cover because I wanted it to have a leather cover, and the only company that would let me sell physical versions of this was Amazon, and it had to be under 800 pages. So it's pretty dang thick still, but the paperback's available on Amazon, and it's only like $25. So it's a lot more affordable than these other versions. Now, the only problem with it is because I was using public domain versions, it's still in the Old English, so it's still comparable to the King James Version, just with some more literal changes, even though the King James Version was pretty literal to begin with. So at the end of the day, I decided to compile my own translation of the Bible because I just wasn't satisfied with what I was finding. Green's literal would probably be my preferred translation to direct people to. It's just pretty hard to get a hold of, and even the paperback is pretty expensive. But anyways, that's what I've been getting into in that regard, and then I've been using all these different versions in my Bible study. When I am able to go to church on Sundays, we have Sunday school, which starts before the service, and we've been getting into Revelations, which I never got into because I thought it was depressing or apocalyptic. I guess it is apocalyptic, but it's not as depressing as I was led on to believe. I think a lot of Christians tend to avoid it, but through reading it, I found so many references throughout the Bible, and it's really made me dig deep into study, which I think is very helpful for us because it's very easy to just get burnt out from reading the Gospels over and over and over again, or what you're familiar with, instead of actually delving into other books. And Revelations is referencing so many prophecies, and it references back to, and you can reference back to Jesus referencing prophecies, and then you're like, I gotta look more into the Old Testament, and I've just gotten sucked into that in the past couple weeks, and having now understood how we get our English translations of the Bible makes me more confident in my understanding of what I'm reading. Now, since this is a gaming channel, I'm not expecting a ton of feedback on this video, but if you are a Christian, let me know what version of the Bible you read. I don't think many people really think about it, and really, if you are reading, that is the best thing you can do regardless of what version. This is just something that I got really sucked into, but I'm just curious what people are generally reading, so leave a comment if you are reading any version. I guess that's it for this video. That was really the only topic I had to talk about. I just learned that church was going to be closed the other day, so this was still kind of a spur of the moment thing. But I wanted to make another one-on-one video with you guys because I've kind of just been pumping out Call of Duty plays, and sometimes my head is a bit scattered when focusing on video games. I hope, since I thought a little bit beforehand, I made some kind of reason in this video. I never really prepare a script or anything for these videos. I just talk into a camera because I would sound so robotic if I prepared a script. I don't know how voice actors do it, but I guess when I see you guys in the next video, I'll be playing more Call of Duty, and I do think I'm gonna make a PlayStation Vita video because some people voted for that, and I've been waiting to do that for a while. There's not too many people who know of all the games the Vita actually got, and I've collected quite a few now, so I thought it would be interesting to just show off the Vita games that I find fun to play. So I'll see you guys in that video, and I hope you have a good Sunday.